Hello everyone, this is Days, and today I'm here to figure out with you guys what's the vision for Dark Souls Remastered from a community's point of view. I believe that's what a remastered game is meant for. It's meant to answer for the community's demand for a refined older game in order to make it match up to today's standards of gaming without forcing the game to lose its original charm. Be it graphical or mechanical refinements, anyone who has played Dark Souls 1 knows its goods and bads. And trust me, after the gameplay tweaks and refinements of Dark Souls 3, we now have proof of functioning tweaks and improvements that have been translated into Dark Souls 3 and cannot simply be ignored after all these years of playing Souls games. There is a threshold of gameplay improvements that Bandai Namco needs to make sure is fulfilled before releasing the game. I'm here now to discuss what we all think needs to be fixed and figure out the boundaries at which things simply can't change for the sake of originality and integrity of the game. Let's start with the biggest mechanical fix that I bet you at least more than 99% of the community agrees on: backstabs and their abusable nature in application. We saw what Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne did to fix the backstab issue, which plagued Dark Souls 1. Both tried in their own respect, with Dark Souls 3 having the best possible backstab mechanics in all games. I think the least they can do for Dark Souls 1 is not waste the time they're spending on making dedicated servers for 6-man lobbies, on players backstab chaining each other to death. I'm sure we'll all enjoy the game that it's back and it's more beautiful than ever, but it will be a matter of time before we remember how much better it is to play the game without this particular exploit. And then Dark Souls 3 comes to mind, which will make you want to play Dark Souls 3, increasing the player count for Dark Souls 3, but I doubt that's their intention with this remaster. It simply can't be bait to play Dark Souls 3 again. It wouldn't make sense. They might as well just give us Dark Souls 3 DLC. Obviously they're working on something here. It's taking them till May 25th to release the game, which is part of the reason why I felt incentivized to make this video. If it's taking them that much time, then surely there's work being done here. All in all, I genuinely hope we don't see the return of old backstab mechanics. The least they can do is make it match up to Dark Souls 3's standards. That's all. Next thing I think they could work on is the ever so simple decision to put a few more extra items behind Covenant rankings. A reason to keep players playing and keep the activity flowing within the servers, but knowing what they gave us in Dark Souls 3, something tells me they may not do anything to the Covenants. So I'll leave this particular topic alone, at least until further confirmations. Now earlier I talked about the boundaries at which we should recognize when to change something to appeal to more modern players or leave it as it is for the sake of integrity and originality, which is what captivated the players in the first place. Let me make it clear that the mindset to make this game appeal to a more modern/younger demographic of players is obviously a big mistake, at least when dealing with such an exclusive game like Dark Souls. What I'm getting at is no early bonfires like all the Dark Souls games that came after it. This is a topic where some of the newcomers or even older players might want to change about Dark Souls 1, but no, we say to them, making these gritty decisions of which way to go first before we got to unlock the Lord Vessel was something we never got to do again after Dark Souls 1. So yes, I do miss the unforgiving nature of Dark Souls 1's early game, and maybe the people will be reminded of what made Dark Souls 1 such a unique experience after this remaster, and developers will be inspired to make something similar in their own games. Are we over the boundaries when trying to change such a pivotal feature of the game and make it appeal to more players? The answer is yes, we are. And we would like to keep it as it is. Thank you very much. Open and shut case. Also, I've linked an article below from Kotaku that briefly reminds you of the importance of keeping the old bonfire system in Dark Souls 1. Go ahead and check that. Let's just get it out of the way that no additional content will be added to Dark Souls Remastered besides Artorias of the Abyss DLC, as stated in many articles around the internet. Which is what leads me to believe that there won't be improvements to Covenants. Though I would hope they'd continue to do what they've stopped doing in Dark Souls 3, which is supply the community with more PvP maps, which really cost nothing considering they already have the assets. They just need to cut the appropriate parts of the map and make them into little arenas for PvP. But seriously, in my head it sounds possible, but I don't think they'll do anything about it. I'll save myself the disappointment and keep my expectations in check. That's how I prefer to look at it, really. So yeah, no additional content as far as we know. Alright, let's talk about poise. This is a divisive topic that I think most people have different opinions on. Which one do we go for? The Dark Souls poise system, where you can wear heavy armor and take a few hits before getting stunned, or the Dark Souls 3 system, where poise is defined by how many hits you can take before you land the first hit with a strength weapon. In other words, in Dark Souls 3, poise is activated when you attempt to swing a strength weapon and not by wearing heavy armor. Heavy armor combined with strength weapons will only increase the amount of hits you can take while swinging a strength weapon. So you could say that in Dark Souls 3, the poise system isn't even based on armor anymore, but rather based on weapons. In other words, it's just hyper armor frames that activate when you swing a strength weapon. You won't have poise if you're wearing heavy armor with light weapons. It doesn't really work that way. For more of an in-depth take on poise, I left a link in the description for you guys to check out. When I think back to the days where people will stack up on poise and simply go through attacks to get the backstab, I remember why we called it a flawed masterpiece. It was frustrating indeed. And in my own humble opinion, it surely doesn't work better than Dark Souls 3's poise system. And that's not me saying that the poise in Dark Souls 3 is perfect. There are many things to consider in terms of balance when you have a fairly big variety of weapons in the game, especially in the PvP scene, which grew larger and larger with each game. Though I honestly find it hard to believe that Namco is going to go through all of this effort to perfect the remaster. I only hope that they get the essentials tweaked and done. I personally would be on board with the idea that poise in Dark Souls Remastered is on par with that of Dark Souls 3's, which should entail fixing strength weapons in Dark Souls Remastered alongside poise, since strength weapons and poise go hand in hand in Dark Souls 3, assuming they're going to adopt the Dark Souls 3 poise system, unless they have their own new idea of how poise works, which I highly doubt, but I hope I'm proven wrong in this particular case. What's wrong with strength weapons in Dark Souls 1, you ask? Well, they were almost completely unviable. The amount of inactive frames after swinging most strength weapons in Dark Souls 1 rendered them nearly useless in PvP. Most videos of advanced Dark Souls 1 PvP, so to say, use strength weapons to take the riposte after a parry, or even for backstabs. Not really making full use of the strength weapon category now, are we? Speaking of changes, how about all the sorcery builds being the only relatively viable spell builds, and all the uselessness of offensive miracles, and the mediocrity of pyromancy in Dark Souls 1? Well, if you ask me, I'd say they're gonna keep it all the same. Given that it's not FromSoft primarily working on the remaster, Bandai Namco has employed Q-Lock, a Polish game development studio that has collaborated with Ninja Theory on the latest Devil May Cry and Hellblade, as well as Dragon's Dogma's Remastered, Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition, and many various other games. Though we could say FromSoft will be supervising the remaster, they're primarily busy with their own new IP. And according to an article from VG247, Q-Lock has been working on the Xbox One, PS4, and PC versions of the game for almost a year now. How much change are they bringing? And to what extent are they willing to go? Only time will tell. But what we can do now is at least bring it to their attention as to what we mostly desire about the remaster. In terms of damage scaling, flipping Havels or giant daddying around and mages spamming one of the few effective spells in the game like Dark Beads or Soul Spear, I personally think that won't change. These are age-old exploits that existed back then and will probably continue to exist. I honestly think that the game won't be as we want it to be on release. Instead, it will be released with flaws, and with time, people will complain. After the complaints are heard, Bandai will then work on picking the most reasonable complaints and start patching up the game to fulfill our desires for a truly enjoyable Dark Souls experience, unless Namco is doing that right now, which is why I implore those of you who care enough to make your voices be heard. The game won't be perfect, but whatever can be done to make it a smoother, more enjoyable experience with overall quality of life improvements like being able to consume more than one soul item at a time, omnidirectional rolling, being able to roll out of emotes, shortening the inactive frames of weapon movesets, especially for strength weapons given how slow they are in Dark Souls 1, at least make them match up to the viability of strength weapons in Dark Souls 3. as well as modern password system, which has already been implemented, by the way. It has been confirmed that the modern password system exists in Dark Souls Remastered. All of these things can be very appreciated by the community and will definitely strengthen the relationship between the community and those behind making the whole thing happen. If they do this remaster right, especially for such a legacy game at this point like Dark Souls 1, the community will never forget it, and they'll always remember how they were treated with such a refined and tweaked remaster, yet still felt as original as the initial game. There's nothing better than a good old Dark Souls Remastered experience to keep us busy for a year until we hear more on the new game from Fromsoftware. Better yet, we will have strong reason to keep Dark Souls on our active shelf of games and not our storage shelf. And by the way, for those who want to spend $400 to $500 on a sick Dark Souls Trilogy box, you can do that as it's available for purchase on the 24th of May. Maybe only in Japan, but there are ways to get your hands on one if you really want it. This box comes with all games, with all of their DLC, soundtracks, and encyclopedia for each game, 10 art sheets and a special frame, and the super cool little book holder with a fancy bonfire and night sculpting on it. Other than that, take care, and I'll see you guys in the next one.